They say you don't notice the cracks until the foundation is already crumbling. Looking back, I realize how much I ignored, how much I dismissed as normal, even as my gut was screaming at me to pay attention. But love has a way of blinding you, of convincing you that the person you've built your life with couldn't possibly be hiding something so devastating. I'm Elliot, is 28, and my wife, Lucy, is 25. We've been married for 3 years, though we've been together much longer. Lucy has always been the center of attention, the kind of person who lights up a room just by walking into it. She's beautiful, funny, and has a voice that could stop anyone in their tracks. That voice was what made her a regular performer at a local bar, a gig she loved and took seriously. Her performances were one of the highlights of her week, and she'd spend hours rehearsing at home, perfecting her sets. I loved watching her perform. At first, it was magical, seeing the way she captivated the audience, the way people hung on every note she sang. I was so proud of her, of how confident and passionate she was on that stage. But over time, the novelty wore off. Life got busy, and my long hours at work made it harder to attend her shows. She didn't seem to mind, always brushing it off with a smile and saying she understood. She was independent like that, happy to do her own thing while I did mine. But then there was him. Lucy had been mentioning someone in passing, a man named Ben, one of the bar's regulars. She'd said he came to almost every one of her performances, always sitting near the front and clapping the loudest. At first, it sounded innocent enough. She said he was just a fan, someone who appreciated her music. I didn't think much of it. After all, she had a lot of fans. It was part of the job. But then she started mentioning him more often. How he always stayed after her set to chat. How he'd compliment her voice, her song choices, her stage presence. How he was a great listener and seemed to really understand her passion for music. I remember feeling a small twinge of unease the first time she described him that way, but I brushed it off. I told myself it was harmless. She was married to me, after all. What could possibly happen? Still, the way she talked about him stuck with me. There was a warmth in her tone, a kind of admiration that felt different. I started paying closer attention, noticing how much she'd light up when she talked about her performances, and how Ben's name seemed to come up more often than not. She didn't mean anything by it, I told myself. She was just excited to have someone who appreciated her talent. But then little things started to change. Lucy became more invested in her appearance before her shows, spending extra time on her hair and makeup. She bought new outfits, ones that were more glamorous than her usual style. When I commented on it, she said she just wanted to feel confident on stage. It sounded reasonable, so I didn't push. She also started staying later after her performances. At first, it was just an extra 15 minutes here and there, but soon it was an hour, sometimes more. When I asked why, she said she was networking with other musicians or catching up with the bar staff. Again, it seemed plausible, so I let it go. But the unease I'd felt earlier was growing. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that there was more to her late nights and glowing descriptions of Ben than she was letting on. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was just projecting my insecurities onto her. But deep down, I knew there was more to the story. One night, while Lucy was performing, I found myself scrolling through her social media. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just killing time while waiting for her to come home. But then I noticed something odd. A man I didn't recognize had liked almost every one of her posts, especially the ones about her performances. His comments were always enthusiastic, filled with praise for her talent and beauty. I clicked on his profile, and my stomach sank when I saw his name, Ben. It wasn't just the frequency of his interactions that bothered me. It was the tone. His comments were personal, almost intimate, as though he knew her in a way most fans didn't. I tried to brush it off, telling myself he was just another admirer, someone who didn't know she was married. But the unease in my chest refused to go away. When Lucy came home that night, she was glowing, her eyes bright with excitement as she recounted the evening's performance. I listened, nodding along as she talked about the crowd, the songs, the energy of the room. But all I could think about was Ben, his name, his face, the way she seemed to light up when she talked about him. The moment Lucy walked through the door that night, I knew something was different. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes sparkled, and she carried a bouquet of bright red roses in her hands. She looked radiant, almost like she was walking on air. For a second, I felt a pang of guilt for my growing suspicions. Maybe I'd been overthinking things. Maybe her late nights and Ben's presence in her stories weren't as meaningful as I feared. But then I asked about the flowers. Lucy smiled and set them down on the counter, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "They're from Ben," she said, her tone casual, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. My heart sank. It wasn't just the words, it was the way she said them, light and airy, like she expected me to be okay with it. She quickly added that there was no reason to worry, her voice soft and reassuring. Ben was just a fan, she said, someone who appreciated her music and liked to show his support. She loved only me, she insisted, and she'd never do anything to jeopardize what we had. Her words sounded sincere, and I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that the flowers were just a harmless gesture, a kind act from someone who admired her talent. But something about the way she said it didn't sit right. It wasn't her words. It was her timing, the way she seemed almost too eager to reassure me before I'd even had a chance to react. It was like she was trying to defuse a bomb that hadn't gone off yet. I nodded, pretending to accept her explanation. I didn't want to start a fight or make her feel like I didn't trust her. But inside, my mind was racing. The flowers were a step too far. Compliments and praise on social media were one thing, but a bouquet of roses carried a different weight, a different meaning. And the fact that Lucy didn't seem to recognize that, or worse, that she did but dismissed it, made my unease grow. Over the next few days, the flowers sat on the counter, a constant reminder of the conversation we'd had. Lucy didn't mention Ben again, and I didn't bring it up, but every time I saw the bouquet, I couldn't help but wonder what it meant. Was Ben just a fan? Was Lucy telling the truth about their relationship? Or was there something she wasn't saying, something she was trying to hide behind her reassurances? I started paying closer attention to the little details I'd been ignoring. Lucy's phone, which had always been an open book, was now glued to her side. She'd laugh softly at messages she received, her face lighting up in a way that felt too familiar. When I asked who she was talking to, she'd brush it off, saying it was a friend or someone from the bar. Her explanations sounded reasonable, but the way she avoided my eyes when she said them made me question everything. She also seemed more invested in her appearance than ever before. Lucy had always been naturally beautiful, the kind of person who could throw on jeans and a t-shirt and look stunning. But now, she was putting more effort into her outfits, her makeup, her hair. She said it was because performing in front of a crowd made her feel alive, and she wanted to present her best self. But part of me wondered if it was for the crowd or for Ben. Her performances became more frequent, too. She started picking up extra gigs at the bar, saying the owner had asked her to fill in for other acts. I wanted to believe her, but the timing felt too convenient. It gave her more opportunities to see Ben, more reasons to come home late with that same glow in her eyes, the same flush in her cheeks. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was reading too much into things. But the flowers kept staring back at me from the counter, a silent reminder that something about Lucy's story didn't add up. They felt like a line had been crossed, like the dynamic between Lucy and Ben had shifted into something more personal, more intimate. One night, as Lucy got ready for another performance, I found myself staring at the bouquet, my thoughts racing. It wasn't just about the flowers or Ben or Lucy's behavior. It was about the way everything fit together, the way each small detail pointed to something bigger, something I didn't want to see. I didn't say anything as she left for the bar. Her hair perfectly styled, her lipstick a shade brighter than usual. I kissed her goodbye and wished her luck, my voice calm and steady even as my heart pounded in my chest. I needed more proof, more clarity, before I could confront her. But the unease I felt that night wouldn't go away. The flowers from Ben sat on the counter for days, their vibrant red petals slowly wilting. But the unease they represented only grew stronger. Lucy hadn't mentioned him since that night, but I couldn't stop thinking about her tone, the way she'd reassured me before I could even process what she'd said. It felt calculated, a preemptive strike to disarm any suspicions I might have had. I decided it was time to test the waters, to see if Lucy's actions matched her words. One evening, as she was getting ready for another performance, I casually suggested that I come along to watch. It had been a while since I'd seen her perform, and I figured it would be a good opportunity to support her and spend some time together. My offer was genuine on the surface, but underneath, it was a subtle attempt to see how she'd react. Lucy froze for just a moment, so brief that someone who didn't know her as well as I did might not have noticed. But I caught it. The way her hand hesitated as she applied her lipstick, the way her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she turned to face me. Then, with practiced ease, she launched into a series of excuses. She gently insisted that I didn't need to come, that it would be too much of a hassle for me after my long shift driving. She said I wasn't really into live performances or crowded bars, and reminded me of how uncomfortable I usually found those kinds of settings. It wasn't a direct no, but it was clear she didn't want me there. Then came the clincher. Lucy told me that the bar was already fully booked for the night, that all the tables had been reserved in advance. She said she didn't want me to come all the way there only to end up standing in the back, crammed into a corner where I wouldn't enjoy myself. Her tone was light, her smile warm, but I could feel the tension beneath her words. She was trying too hard to dissuade me, to make it seem like my absence was for my own good. I played along, nodding and pretending to agree. I told her she was right, that I'd probably just be in the way, and that I'd stay home and wait for her to tell me all about it later. But inside, my suspicions grew. Why didn't she want me there? Was it really about the crowd? Or was it about Ben? After Lucy left for the bar, I sat alone in the quiet of our apartment, replaying the conversation in my mind. The way she'd smiled, the way she'd touched my arm as she gently discouraged me from coming. It was all so deliberate, so perfectly crafted to seem innocent. But it wasn't. I knew it wasn't. That night, as I sat on the couch scrolling through my phone, I couldn't stop thinking about how easily she'd brush me off. Lucy had always loved having me in the audience when she performed. She used to tell me how much it meant to her to see me there, cheering her on. But now, she seemed almost relieved that I wasn't coming. It felt like she was hiding something, like my presence would disrupt whatever dynamic she had going on at the bar. I started to wonder if Ben would be there. Was he sitting in his usual spot, clapping the loudest, waiting to hand her another bouquet of flowers? Was he staying after her set to chat, to laugh, to share moments that should have been ours? The thought made my stomach churn, but I pushed it down. I needed to stay calm, to keep gathering pieces of the puzzle before I could confront her. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much Lucy had changed. She used to be open, honest, and excited to share her life with me. But now, everything felt guarded, calculated. Her reassurances, her excuses, her insistence that I didn't need to come to her performances. It all felt like a wall she was building between us. And I couldn't help but wonder what, or who, she was trying to protect behind it. I decided then and there that I couldn't keep sitting idly by. If Lucy wasn't going to tell me the truth, I'd have to find it myself. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but I knew I couldn't ignore the signs any longer. After weeks of brushing aside my instincts and trying to give Lucy the benefit of the doubt, I decided it was time to take a more direct approach. I needed to test her, to see how she'd react when confronted with something small yet significant. I wanted to gauge how deep her lies went without outright accusing her of anything. So, I planned a day that would seem perfectly innocent on the surface. I took the day off from work and told Lucy I wanted to surprise her with a special lunch at her favorite restaurant. It had been a while since we'd gone out together, just the two of us, and I thought the gesture would catch her off guard in just the right way. I noticed her growing discomfort whenever I suggested spending time together, and this felt like an opportunity to see how far she'd go to avoid intimacy. Lucy looked genuinely surprised when I told her about the plan. At first, she hesitated, her expression shifting as though she was trying to think of an excuse. But she quickly recovered, smiling and agreeing that it would be nice to have a day out together. Her acceptance was almost too smooth, too rehearsed, but I played along, pretending not to notice the flicker of unease in her eyes. As she got ready, I suggested she wear the earrings I'd given her for our anniversary last year. A beautiful pair of sapphire studs she'd gushed over when I first surprised her with them. They were her favorite, or so she'd said, and she used to wear them constantly. But lately, I hadn't seen them at all. I figured this would be a harmless way to see if she was as honest as she claimed. The moment I mentioned the earrings, Lucy froze. It was subtle, a slight stiffening of her shoulders, a flicker of hesitation in her movements. But it was enough to make my heart race. She turned to face me, her smile faltering for just a moment before she plastered it back on. She said something about how she hadn't seen them in a while, that they were probably misplaced in her jewelry box, and she didn't want to risk being late by searching for them. Her excuse sounded plausible on the surface, but it didn't sit right. Lucy had always been organized, almost to a fault. She prided herself on knowing exactly where everything was, especially something as special as the earrings I'd given her. Her sudden claim that she'd misplaced them felt flimsy, like she was scrambling to cover something up. I nodded and let it go, not wanting to push too hard and risk tipping her off. But inside, my suspicions grew. The earrings weren't misplaced. I was sure of it. I'd seen her wearing them just a few weeks ago, and now they were suddenly gone. My mind immediately went to Ben. Was it possible she'd left them at his place? The thought made my stomach twist, but I couldn't ignore the possibility. Throughout lunch, Lucy was her usual charming self, laughing and chatting as though nothing was wrong. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she was performing, putting on a show to distract me from the cracks in her story. I watched her closely, noting the little signs of discomfort. The way she avoided eye contact when I brought up anything personal, the way she deflected my questions with jokes or vague answers. The earrings had been a small test, but they revealed more than I expected. It wasn't just about the earrings themselves, it was about the pattern of behavior they exposed. Lucy was hiding something, and every small lie, every deflection, every calculated smile only made that clearer. When we got home, I pretended everything was fine, thanking her for a lovely day and giving her a quick kiss before retreating to the living room. But inside, I was more determined than ever to uncover the truth. The earrings, the flowers, the late nights, it was all adding up, and I was starting to see the bigger picture. I decided then and there that I couldn't keep playing this game. Lucy had built a wall of lies, and if she wasn't going to come clean, I'd have to find a way to break it down myself. The night I decided to follow Lucy to the bar was one of the longest nights of my life. After weeks of suspicion, lies, and evasions, I couldn't take it anymore. The missing earrings, the flowers from Ben, her sudden discomfort whenever I suggested spending time together. It all pointed to something she wasn't telling me. I needed answers, and I knew I wouldn't get them by waiting for her to confess. Lucy left the house around 7 p.m., dressed to perfection as always. She said she'd be home by midnight, the same rehearsed line she'd used so many times before. I nodded, feigning indifference as I watched her walk out the door, her heels clicking against the pavement. As soon as she was out of sight, I grabbed my keys and followed. I parked a few blocks away from the bar, not wanting to risk being seen. The place was busy, as usual, its neon sign glowing faintly in the night. Groups of people milled around outside, smoking and chatting, their laughter carrying over the hum of traffic. I stayed in my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my heart pounding as I tried to convince myself that this was the right thing to do. About 2 hours passed, each minute dragging like an eternity. I watched as people came and went, couples holding hands, groups of friends laughing and stumbling out together. Then, just as I was beginning to doubt myself, I saw her. Lucy stepped out of the bar, her laughter ringing out as she leaned into the man walking beside her. My stomach dropped. It was Ben, the same Ben she'd casually mentioned so many times, the one who'd sent her flowers, the one I'd tried to convince myself was nothing more than a harmless fan. They paused near the edge of the sidewalk, standing closer than they needed to. Lucy was smiling up at him, her face glowing under the dim streetlights. Ben reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and then it happened. He leaned in, and she didn't pull away. Their kiss wasn't brief or hesitant. It was deliberate, passionate, the kind of kiss that left no room for misunderstanding. I sat frozen, my chest tightening as I watched the woman I'd built my life with kiss another man. Every doubt, every suspicion I'd tried to suppress came crashing down in that moment. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking as I opened the camera and started recording. I captured every second. The kiss, the way she laughed softly afterward, the way she climbed into Ben's car without hesitation. When the car pulled away, I stayed where I was, staring at the empty space where they'd just been. My mind was racing, a storm of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. But beneath the chaos, there was a strange sense of clarity. I finally had the truth, and there was no denying it anymore. I opened my email and attached the video, sending it directly to my lawyer. The subject line was simple: evidence. As I hit send, I felt a strange mix of relief and devastation. This wasn't just about confronting Lucy anymore. It was about protecting myself, about making sure I wasn't blindsided by whatever came next. I drove home in silence, the weight of what I'd seen settling over me like a heavy blanket. Every detail of the night replayed in my mind. The way she smiled at Ben, the way she kissed him, the way she got into his car like it was the most natural thing in the world. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was deliberate, calculated, and unforgivable. When I got home, the apartment felt colder than ever. I sat on the couch, staring at the walls, my mind racing with what I needed to do next. The evidence was out there now, safely in my lawyer's hands. There was no turning back. Revenge isn't something I ever thought I'd pursue, but betrayal has a way of changing you. After everything I'd uncovered, Lucy's lies, her kiss with Ben, her casual destruction of the life we'd built, I couldn't just walk away without ensuring she faced the consequences of her actions. It wasn't about being petty or vindictive. It was about making her understand the magnitude of what she'd done. I started planning almost immediately after sending the evidence to my lawyer. I wanted my revenge to be impactful, something she couldn't brush off or explain away. It had to be calculated, deliberate, and, most importantly, undeniable. Lucy had used her charm and her talent to create a facade, one that hid the truth from me, our friends, and even herself. I wanted to shatter that facade, to expose her lies for what they were. Lucy's next performance at the bar provided the perfect opportunity. She'd always loved the stage, loved being in the spotlight, and soaking up the admiration of her audience. I decided to use that stage against her. I contacted the bar owner anonymously and offered to sponsor a special night, a way to celebrate Lucy's talent and bring in more business for the venue. I framed it as a way to surprise her, to show her how much she was appreciated. The owner was thrilled, agreeing to the idea without hesitation. I provided the funds to decorate the bar, set up a bigger stage, and even hire a videographer to capture the evening. It was all part of the plan. On the night of the event, I arrived early, blending into the crowd as people began to gather. The atmosphere was electric, filled with excitement and anticipation. Lucy had no idea I was there. She thought I'd be working late, just as I'd let her believe. She stepped onto the stage, her smile radiant as the crowd cheered. It was a moment she'd waited for her whole life, and I let her savor it, knowing what was coming. Her set began like any other. She sang beautifully, her voice carrying through the room as the audience swayed along. She was in her element, completely unaware of what I'd arranged. Then, as she finished her final song, the lights dimmed, and the screen behind her lit up. At first, the crowd thought it was a highlight reel, a montage of Lucy's performances, a tribute to her talent. But as the video began to play, it became clear that this was no celebration. It was the footage I'd recorded that night outside the bar. The kiss, the laughter, the moment she climbed into Ben's car. It was all there, projected for everyone to see. The room went silent as the video played, the weight of the truth sinking in. Lucy stood frozen on stage, her face pale as she realized what was happening. The cheers turned to whispers, then gasps, as the audience processed what they were seeing. Her co-workers, her friends, her fans, they were all there, their admiration replaced by shock and disbelief. When the video ended, the silence was deafening. Lucy turned to the crowd, her eyes wide, her hands trembling. But there was nothing she could say. The evidence was right there, undeniable and devastating. She looked out at the sea of faces, all of them reflecting the truth she'd worked so hard to hide. I stood in the back, watching as the weight of her betrayal came crashing down on her. It wasn't just about the affair. It was about the lies, the manipulation, The way she'd used her charm to create a version of herself that wasn't real. I felt no guilt, no regret. She'd made her choices, and now she was facing the consequences. As the crowd began to disperse, murmurs of judgment and disappointment filling the air, Lucy stood alone on the stage. She looked around, searching for someone to help her, to save her. But there was no one, not even Ben, who was nowhere to be seen. I left the bar without saying a word, slipping out into the cool night air. I didn't need to confront her directly. The truth had done all the talking for me. Looking back, I know revenge isn't always the answer. But in this case, it was about reclaiming my power, about making sure Lucy understood the gravity of her actions. Betrayal is a painful thing, but it also teaches you who you are and what you're willing to stand for. I learned to trust my instincts, to value honesty and integrity above all else. Lucy's actions hurt me, but they didn't break me. They reminded me that I deserved better, better love, better respect, and better truth.